This episode is brought to you by my friend Rebecca Walser, a financial expert who can help you protect your wealth. Book your free call with her team by going to friendofdinesh.com. That's friendofdinesh.com. Coming up, I'm going to make the case for straight ticket voting for the GOP in November on the grounds that the only good Democrat is a former Democrat. I'll argue that given the extent of cultural erosion in America, we can no longer be conservatives in the old sense because there isn't all that much for us to conserve. Debbie joins me. We're going to be talking about some current issues, from the Alaska GOP censure of Mitch McConnell to how crime has woken up a large blue city in Texas. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Show.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
We have the midterm elections really right around the corner. And a question I want to raise as you think about casting votes is there such a thing as a good Democrat? Now, that can be looked at in a number of different ways. I suppose a good Democrat can be somebody who is a Democrat, but nevertheless a good person. And in that sense, we know Democrats who are decent people, or decent people for the most part. And yet, for some reason, sometimes puzzling or even inexplicable, they vote for the Democrats. That is something that's part of our lives. But the question I ask is a different one. Should we be voting for Democrats at all? Or rather, should we vote the straight ticket? And by vote the straight ticket, in some places, of course, you can straight ticket vote. In Texas, Debbie tells me you can't do that anymore. But of course, you can straight ticket vote by just going down the line, identifying everybody who's a Republican, and regardless of who they are, voting for them. So in other words, the question I'm raising and the argument I'm going to make is that even a bad Republican is better than a so-called good Democrat. Why? Because there are no good Democrats, or to put it somewhat differently, the only good Democrat is a former Democrat. Of course, I'm thinking here, of course, of Reagan, who was a former Democrat and in that sense, a very good Democrat, who recognized that he was among the bad guys. And Reagan always took the view that the Democrats were the party that left him. One of his sayings that has sort of been registered and come down through time is, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me." Now, I've never been entirely on board with that. I used to be. When I was in the Reagan era, I thought it was a very clever saying, and I thought the Democratic Party had actually moved. But if you dig even further back, this was before Reagan. Reagan was a product of the Depression and the New Deal. His father worked for the New Deal. But the Democrats have a very sordid history going back to Andrew Jackson, going back through the 19th century, and then, of course, the party of slavery and segregation in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century. So this is a party with a very bad history. But it stands collectively for very bad things now. And even if you vote for a good Democrat, the good Democrat is not going to be able to stop those bad things. In fact, the good Democrat is going to be counted on, whether in the House by Pelosi or in the Senate by McConnell. In the Senate by McConnell, by Schumer, to continue to deliver bad things for the bad party. By contrast, if we see a significant tip over to the Republican side, and if there is a sufficient margin, we can actually put up with all kinds of dubious and questionable characters on our side. Why? Because we don't need them. Imagine if Republicans had a 30 or 40 seat advantage in the House and there were 20 Republicans who can't be counted on. So what? not only do you have the House, you have the majority leader, you have the leadership of all the committees. All the committees become chaired then by a Republican. You're controlling the agenda, you're controlling the bills that pass through the House, and the same story is true in the Senate. Obviously, if the Senate is 51-49, then we need really pretty much all the Republicans to hang together. But if you have 54, 55, then you've got a little bit of a margin. It doesn't matter if Susan Collins goes over here and Romney goes over there. You don't actually need their votes. So the point here is that American politics is fought in teams. There are only two teams. And by the way, if it ever crosses your mind to look for some third team, there is no third team. The way to get the Republicans in line is to, let's call it, MAGA-ize the Republican Party. And the good news is that that process is already underway. That process is already going on. It will be further advanced if we get the kind of results that I'm expecting out of the 2022 election. And of course, one of the supreme ironies will be if the Democrats, who, by the way, have confessed that they have tried to subsidize the Trumpster candidates, the so-called far-right candidates, the so-called election deniers. And Democrats are like, we think those guys are going to be easier to beat. So wouldn't it be hilarious if Don Bolduc wins in New Hampshire and Blake Masters wins in Arizona and Kerry Lake wins for the governor, and if J.D. Vance wins in Ohio? The Democrats' worst fears will have come true, and that would be a result just downright delightful to behold.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, and I'm excited to announce my original My Slippers are back in stock. You've made them a huge success, and now I've added smaller sizes, larger sizes, wide sizes, and all new colors. And with your promo code, you still save $90 a pair. Not only that, I'm having the biggest closeout sale ever on our sandals and slides for as low as $19.98. What makes my slippers different is my exclusive 4-layer design that you're not going to find in any other slippers. My slippers' patented layers make them ultra comfortable, extremely durable, and they help reduce stress on your feet. Wear them anytime, anywhere. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen now. Use your promo code to save $90 on my original My Slippers, or for as low as $19.98, you can get our sandals or slides. Quantities won't last long, and with my 60-day money-back guarantee, you can rest assured they'll be the most comfortable footwear you'll ever own.
We are no longer conservatives. We are restorationists. This is the title of an article. I want to give credit. It's written by a fellow named John Gabriel, Jon, John Gabriel, and published in Ricochet, ricochet.com. And it's a very short article, just really a few paragraphs. But it kind of got me thinking, so I wanted to read from the article and comment on it. But John Gabriel begins by saying, essentially, who is a conservative? Quote, conservatives have long struggled to define conservatism. Maybe it's a philosophy, maybe it's an attitude or a psychology. And then he quotes Lincoln. Lincoln was once asked about conservatism, and Lincoln says, somewhat wryly or whimsically, is it not adherence to the old and tried against the new and untried? So Lincoln here is making an argument that, look, if you've got a long body of empirical experience that shows that this custom, this way of organizing society, this rule of thumb works well, why wouldn't you go with that over something where you have no idea if it's going to work? Why would you try something novel? The novelty may seem appealing on the surface, but there's a good chance that that new approach will fail. And so what Lincoln is doing really is making the case for tradition. Now, of course, Lincoln would immediately concede that there are, and by the way, this is me talking, not the article, there are good traditions and bad traditions. We have to admit that slavery was a tradition. Slavery existed for a long time. To that degree, it had a lot of accumulated experience behind it. But Lincoln would say that this was an immoral practice that became embedded in our society. So Lincoln is in no way saying that all traditions, all practices, just because they are old, should be affirmed and continued into the future. Not at all. Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, the British writer, put it a little different way when he talked about tradition as, quote, the democracy of the dead. This is, again, Chesterton, who was a very aphoristic and witty writer. Basically says if democracy is counting votes and you only count the votes of people who are alive, you're missing a whole bunch of people. What about the votes? And by votes here, we mean the practices, the mores, the way that people chose to live over earlier generations. Why don't we let them vote? If we let them vote as well, obviously they outnumber us because there are more people who have died at some point in the past than there are alive and walking on the earth today, right now. And so tradition becomes, in a sense, democracy enlarged through time. But back to John Gabriel and the article, he says, look, at one point in America, we had a lot to conserve, but now we don't. Why? Because the left has corrupted enough of America. They've taken over enough of American institutions and American culture that for us to conserve these institutions now is just to conserve the wreckage that they have produced. And so John Gabriel goes on to say, he says, look, we have conserved a few things. He says gun rights is a good example. Red states have conserved some economic policies that are very good. At least as of now, although it is a battle, we've conserved religious liberty. We've seen it abridged in some cases under the pandemic, but it hasn't disappeared. But he says, but in a lot of other ways, we can't really be conservative because the institutions we seek to conserve have become too far gone, too far eroded. He says, for example, there are no national borders left to conserve. He says the right way to put it is they must be restored. And what he's getting at is that a better word, a better name, and names do matter, is we are no longer conservatives, we are restorationists. In other words, tradition by itself is no longer our guidepost. He says, in fact, we've got to make the case for tradition. We've got to restore tradition itself to its kind of rightful place in society. And by tradition here, he means the accumulated wisdom of time. Many people, and this is especially true of young people, I think it's partly because of technology, think that if something is new, it has to be better than what is old. Why? Well, what do we have, honey? Do we have the Apple iPhone 14? Isn't the Apple iPhone 14 better than the 13? Isn't the 13 better than the 12 and the 11 and the 10? So the fact that we have improvement on the technological front somehow gives people the idea, and I think it is an illusion, that this material betterment or progress automatically entails moral progress or social progress or institutional progress. Not at all. American society may be in some ways morally better off. We don't have slavery, for example. We don't have segregation. But in all kinds of other ways, we're morally worse off. The family, and by the way, the family not just in the white community, but also in the black community, is in much worse shape today than it was 50 years ago. And even 50 years ago, it was in much worse shape than it was 100 years ago. So we have seen a good deal of cultural and moral decay. And for this reason, John Gabriel is making the point that it's not simply a matter today of conserving. There are many things that we have lost and we have to put back in its place. And we wouldn't call that conservatism so much as we would call it restorationism. The AARP is rallying behind Biden's tax and spend law, promising members it will reduce inflation, bring relief from big pharma. No, in reality, it's going to hurt the 65-plus crowd financially and medically. Well, AMAC knows the truth. AMAC is the Association of Mature American Citizens. It advocates for its members. You'll never find them in anyone's back pocket. I trust AMAC. They're honest. They fight for your conservative values. Join AMAC today like Debbie and I have. AMAC offers special discounts and benefits. Plus, they provide access to financial and insurance counseling services. For only $16 a year, you can join AMAC. Go to amac.us/Dinesh to start enjoying benefits now. Anyone can join, but if you're a senior, what are you waiting for? Don't let the AARP misrepresent and mislead you. Join AMAC today. AMAC serves its members with integrity and compassion. Join or renew today at amac.us/Dinesh. That's amac.us/Dinesh. Debbie and I here for our Friday roundup, and we want to start by talking about, well, a couple of Republicans who need to be called out. And the first one of them is Mitch McConnell. And Mitch McConnell is being called out. He's being called out by the Alaska Republican Party. You want to talk about this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I saw this in the news that that his leadership PAC, the Senate Leadership Fund, has been running attack ads against Shabaka, right?
So Kelly Shabaka has been on the podcast, and she is the choice of the Republican Party of Alaska. She's the Republican nominee. So think about this. Here's the Senate Majority Leader, Republican, Mitch McConnell, attacking a Republican in Alaska. Why? Because he wants to help Lisa Murkowski hold that seat.
Yes.
Now, Lisa Murkowski is the incumbent, but
yes,
Lisa Murkowski has run afoul of the Alaska Republican Party.
Yes.
They have, they censured her.
They did the same thing to her too.
Well, after she after she voted for Trump's impeachment. And so the Alaska Republican Party, it says here, has passed a 49-8 resolution to tell McConnell to back off. And you know, Kelly Shabaka herself makes a very simple point, which is...
Yeah, so she's like, his intervention in the Alaska race was wasting valuable resources that could go to defeat Democrats in other states. So, but you know what? What you talked about a couple of days ago about McConnell explains it all. McConnell is not really in it for the Republicans, if you think about it. He's really in it for himself and his power. He doesn't care if he's majority leader or minority leader. And all of this behavior makes a whole lot of sense when you get that.
Well, think for a moment about why that might be. It may seem strange to say, why would he not care if he's majority leader or minority leader, as long as he's leader? Well, the answer is the pay is the same. The benefits are the same. The Secret Service protection is the same. The perks are the same. You don't have a smaller office. And you're still the boss of your team. So McConnell would rather be minority leader than be in the Senate, but not the leader. So conserving his own power is primary for him. And this is really the kind of leader we don't need. At least we don't need long term. Again, not to say that McConnell hasn't done some good things. He's been a pretty effective blocker for the Republicans. But this is very bad on his part, in my opinion.
I think, and he's approaching that age where he may need to think about maybe the sunset years and his grandchildren.
Well, I think he needs to be shown the door. I don't think he's going to think about it. He should think about it. But I think power is so intoxicating. It's such an, it's such...
aphrodisiac, right?
It is.
It's for these people.
Another guy who does need to be chastised is Karl Rove. And you want to talk about Rove?
Yeah, so he is supporting Shapiro in Pennsylvania over the GOP opponent. And so his American Crossroads PAC is, it's basically...
Well, I mean, the PAC is running ads, and the ads are pro-Oz and anti-Fetterman. So in the Senate race, they're taking the Republican side. But they're critiquing Fetterman by contrasting Fetterman's weak on crime record with Josh Shapiro, who's running for governor against the Republican Mastriano. And Rove seems to be saying in the ad, I mean, this is something that would be a reasonable implication of the ad, is vote for Shapiro for governor.
Because he's not like other Democrats.
Right. And that's right. He's a good Democrat.
He's a good Democrat.
So vote for Shapiro for governor, not Mastriano, and then vote for Oz. But what's bad about this is that, what's going on with Rove here is that Rove, of course, is a Bush guy. He doesn't like Mastriano because Mastriano is a major Trumpster. Mm-hmm. And so Rove is simultaneously fighting across the political aisle against Fetterman, a Democrat, while at the same time conducting an internecine war in favor of, you can call it, Bush Republicans and against Trump Republicans. So this is another... Now, Democrats don't do this kind of thing. I realize they have a progressive faction and so on in the Democratic Party, but did you notice recently that the progressive faction came out against the Ukraine war? They said we should do a negotiated settlement, and within one day, they backed down. Within one day, they were like, oh, no, this press release was mistakenly released. One of our staffers put it out there. It wasn't properly authorized. So the Biden people, in other words, were able to clamp down and get complete unity on their side on this issue. Republicans have got to realize that we're up against a very ruthless adversary. You're constantly telling me about how they play a different game. They have a different psychology. It's warfare for them. For us, it's like debate night.
No, I mean, and I don't know if Karl Rove or Liz Cheney or any of these people actually understand and realize that not supporting our own is, in essence, supporting the enemy. I mean, do they not see that? I think that it's pretty obvious, but,
I mean, Liz Cheney, I think, has, quite honestly, I say reluctantly become the enemy.
They all have that derangement syndrome against Trump. I mean, that's the key right there, I think.
That's what's driving it.
That's what's driving all of them, and they need to quit it. They need to stop. The only way that America is going to continue to be America, or the old America that we love, is by supporting all of our GOP candidates.
I mean, what's ironic about this is that they're always talking about, Liz Cheney's always talking about, make sure you put the country above yourself.
And
make sure you look at the larger objective. And what you're saying is she's not doing it. You've heard me say it, I'm not a super fan of the flavor of veggies, but I have to admit when I'm in the produce section, all the vibrant colors of fruits and veggies look really good. Now, Dr. Douglas Howard at Balance of Nature has told Debbie and me that, look, all of the colors you see in the produce section equal nutritional variety. Different colors signify different key nutrients. So if you eat only your favorite one or two veggies, well, you're missing a whole world of vital nutrients. This is why Debbie and I take these 6 little fruits and veggie capsules each day. Each daily dose is made up of a blend of 31 different fruits and veggies. 31. So variety equals vitality. Give your body everything it needs with Balance of Nature. For a limited time, all new preferred customers get an additional 35% discount and free shipping on your first Balance of Nature order. Use discount code AMERICA. Call 800-246-8751. That number again, 800-246-8751, or go to balanceofnature.com and use discount code AMERICA. We've talked, Debbie and I have, about the Hispanic shift away from the Democratic Party and toward the GOP. We are seeing that really nationwide. I think we focused probably the most on Texas, partly because we're in Texas, but also partly because the shift in Texas is so significant. The shift in California, less so. It'll probably end up being a tail. In other words, it'll happen, I believe, but it'll follow what's happening in Texas. But we want to talk about Florida. You just saw a very interesting poll. Hispanics in Florida supporting DeSantis over Crist. Right. And we're not just talking here about more Hispanics are moving toward DeSantis. We're talking about DeSantis getting a majority.
They're getting a majority. Now, something that people need to understand, and I think this is why the Hispanic vote and the Hispanic electorate is so difficult to predict, is because of all the nationalities of the Hispanics, right? So
let's go through them.
So the Venezuelans vote a different way, the Cubans vote a different way, the Mexican Americans vote a different way, the Puerto Ricans vote a different way, the Hondurans vote. So there's a lot of different Dominicans. There's a lot of different nationalities. They don't all vote the same and for the same reasons. So when you look at Florida, Florida is mainly composed of Cuban Americans and some Venezuelans that have come over to Florida because it's a little bit easier geographically. But it's interesting how they kind of mix everybody into the fold here in this survey. This bilingual survey was conducted by a Jacksonville-based Mason-Dixon polling and strategy by telephone between October 17th and the 22nd, right? And so DeSantis came came ahead with these Hispanic
Well, let's
voters.
see. DeSantis gets 51,
51%.
and Christ gets 44.
Yeah.
So that's not. Well, let's see. DeSantis is 10 points ahead of Christ in the overall voting. So the Hispanic margin is not as big as the general, but it's a pretty substantial one.
Yep.
So 51 to 44 is 7 points.
Right. And it says more men surveyed expressed support for DeSantis than for Christ by a margin of 54 to 40%. Women were evenly split with 48% expressing support for each. And the overwhelming majority, which does not surprise me one iota, is Cuban Americans. 72% of them support.
Now, they don't tease out the Venezuelans, but Debbie's saying, I expect the Venezuelan number to be close to that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
but Puerto Ricans and,
Yeah.
and Mexican Americans, now there aren't that many Mexican Americans in Florida. They actually support Christ by a small margin, but 53 to 43% in one case. But because there are more Cubans, the balance tips over to DeSantis. And interestingly, they say that while DeSantis is getting 92% of the Republicans, Christ is getting 92% of the Democrats. It's the independents who are making the difference.
Independents. Now, an interesting little tidbit about Christ and his morphing from a Republican to an independent to a Democrat. This guy doesn't know what he is or what he stands for, right? And so I'm not sure that people know this. What I found amusing was that in the debate with DeSantis, where, by the way, Christ was being clobbered left and right, basically, Christ scores only 1 point. And his point is, you know what? DeSantis might run for president. He might even be chosen president. And if so, he won't be able to serve his full term as governor. So let's decode that statement. What he's basically saying is that there are two of us running, and one of us is a rock star, happens to be DeSantis. And it may be that even though the governor of Florida is a good job, there's a bigger job. And so maybe the country will want this guy to take a step up and run the country. But, and in a sense, what Chris is saying is that would never happen to me. In other words, I'm not even in that class. Nobody even thinks of my name as somebody who'd be appointed to a higher job. So what he seems to be saying is Florida should settle for me instead of picking this rock star DeSantis, who might be called on to do higher things and take his success record in Florida and essentially deliver for the whole country. Think of what a boomerang type of argument that is. Yeah, that's
when you really think it through.
That's giving your opponent a little bit of kudos, actually.
Exactly, without intending
without meaning to.
Yeah, this guy may move on to a better job.
Yeah.
No, Florida, you don't want him. He might be.
But I mean, this guy, what I found him just appalling as a Republican. I mean, I always thought he was a rhino, but so I wasn't surprised when he became an independent because he couldn't win as a Republican. And you remember he ran against Rubio, and the Tea Party movement just rallied around Rubio and just kind of brought him up and defeated him. But and then he's like, oh yeah, well, as an independent, I'm kind of like non-existent. Oh, you know what? Let me just be a Democrat.
He had an interesting race against a left-wing progressive, and many people thought that the left-wing progressive would win because, of course, by and large, there are a lot of left-wing progressives who are the activists in the Democratic Party. But interestingly, Chris pulled it off, but he's not going to pull it off against DeSantis. In fact, they say that Florida Democrats have already kind of conceded the election. By the way, with the Hispanics, they give the reasons, and I thought it's interesting. The number one reason was that DeSantis kept Florida open, which I think for Hispanics meant I got to keep my job. I didn't lose my paycheck. And so you see how the economic issues here are critical.
I heard on the radio yesterday that someone was saying that Florida was the freest state in America and the freest part of the world. So I thought that was really interesting. DeSantis, amazing
deserves a lot of credit. And it was a risky move because had it failed, DeSantis would have taken the blame. But since it succeeded, he gets the benefit. If you want to know what the left's real plan is for your kids, just look at the reaction to the work that Patriot Mobile did in multiple school districts in Texas. The left is just losing their minds. Now, Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative mobile phone provider and a force for conservative values. This is because they take a portion of your bill and fund conservative causes and candidates who believe in the sanctity of life, freedom of speech, the Second Amendment, and they're winning. Patriot Mobile has affordable plans for you, your family, even your business. They offer the same nationwide coverage as the major carriers because they use multiple major networks. Plus, you're supporting conservative values with every call. Go to patriotmobile.com, patriotmobile.com/Dinesh, or call 972-PATRIOT. Get free activation with the offer. The code is Dinesh, Dinesh. Special discounts available for veterans and first responders. Join our movement. Make the switch today and a difference tomorrow. patriotmobile.com/Dinesh. That's patriotmobile.com/Dinesh, or call 972-PATRIOT. I saw something very interesting today, which is that Biden has instructed the key figures in his administration to focus on one issue and one issue alone, and that's the economy. So what's happening here is the Democrats thought in the weeks leading up to now that they could do well in the midterm election and hold their own by talking about abortion and talking about attacks on democracy that are being led by Republican election deniers and potential insurgents. And all of that has fallen flat. I think it's fallen flat in part because everybody knows that even the accusations are made by people who don't really believe them. The January 6th committee knows, it doesn't really believe that there was an armed insurgency to overthrow the U.S. government. So we've been listening to nonstop nonsense on the public airwaves with the media cheering it on. But at some level, reality catches up with people and people go, well, that doesn't really make sense to me. And so even though the ordinary American isn't that attuned to politics, they know when they're being fed a diet of pure insincerity. So the Biden people now realize this whole campaign strategy is a loser. It's not working. The Republicans are making hay and scoring points. Why? They're focusing on two things. On the one hand, the economy, which is to say inflation, gas prices, and on the other hand, crime. And I think we want to focus on crime in this segment on crime.
Yeah. So, crime, as you know, in Houston, we talked about that this morning. The Houston crime rate has gone up over 300%. And so it is definitely an issue that voters are taking notice of. And remember, I always say, we can't go. We just got a new car. We cannot go to Houston because I don't want to get carjacked.
I mean, this is surprising to me because I don't think like this. And so we'll talk about going to our favorite Indian restaurant, which is in Houston. And Debbie's like, you can't take your new car. And I'm like, why not? And she's like, because you could be carjacked. You could be vandalized. Somebody could, it's going to be something that's going to attract the attention of criminals. And the criminals are running amok in Houston. So,
and the Houston Crime Stoppers of Houston actually are saying, vote out all the Democratic judges. They're saying this
because they're the criminal coddlers.
Yes, they have actually stated that is the reason why that these dangerous criminals, these activist judges, are letting out dangerous criminals out of jail, and a lot of people, law-abiding citizens, are at risk because this is what's happening. So this is an assault on the community. And, again, there are Democrats, actually, and I was very surprised to hear a lot of Democrats are actually rallying behind all of the Republican candidates that are up for,
I mean, this is just telling because it means that they're fed up, all Democratic cities have bad crime problems. But the way the Democrats save the city, so to speak, is they have the crime problems in the black neighborhoods and in the sort of the inner part of the inner city. And so professionals can operate in the city and they're not directly affected by crime, even though it's going on in their city, it's not going on in their area. But what's happened is when crime breaks out to a certain point, it's now everywhere. So it's not everywhere to the same degree, but it becomes a serious problem no matter where you are. This happened in New York in the 1970s. Crime became so bad. I mean, this is why they made all those movies about the vigilantes going around the subways, Charles Bronson and so on. And then New York got fixed, although New York has lapsed and it hasn't gotten back to as bad as it was. Yeah,
so interestingly, every time that you bring in the Republican, whether it's mayor or in this case...
It was Giuliani and whoever, George Pataki.
As soon as they leave, it goes back to being the same. So I don't really get why people don't get that. You know, it's like, just keep voting for Republican mayors and Republican judges. And the interesting thing is... so her name is Lina Hidalgo, and she is actually the county judge for Harris County. And she's not a judge like what most people would think of as a judge. She actually acts like a mayor. So she's kind of for Harris County, for the county of in the surrounding area of Houston, or in the middle of Houston, which is probably the largest county in all of Texas. I mean, it's huge, huge.
Now, she would normally have, as a Democrat in a Democratic area, a pretty safe passage. Yes. But, says the Texas Tribune, and by the way, they're kind of lobbying for, if you read the headline, Lina Hidalgo, a rising Democratic star, faces a tough re-election race.
Yes.
Her opponent is giving her a run for her money. Why?
Yes.
Basically because of crime.
Because of crime. So hammering the 31-year-old incumbent over the county's high number of homicides and the criminal indictment of 3 Hidalgo staffers. So she's also in trouble, embezzling money, all kinds of things. And
so Alexandra de Moral Mealer is apparently her challenger. Yeah. And ordinarily...
She's a West Point graduate, an ex-Army captain who served a decade in Afghanistan. She's put her on the defensive, and it looks like she's going to win. I mean, all the polls indicate that she's going to win.
Well, this is really important because it needs to send them... Normally, we wouldn't focus on a race like this, but we're focusing on it because it is telling about this larger phenomenon that even for Democrats, there is a kind of point at which it's too much. I just saw an interesting tweet by someone, an old rival of mine that I've debated, the guy from Young Turks, Cenk Uygur.
You want to talk about that in the next segment?
Yeah, we'll pick it up in the next one. Sure. What some of us would do just to be young again, the simple things like climbing stairs, getting in and out of bed, or taking a walk aren't always that simple. Too many aches and pains. But they can be simple because, thankfully, now there's a 100% drug-free solution for those aches and pains. It's called Relief Factor. Relief Factor supports your body's fight against inflammation that's the source of aches and pains. The vast majority of people who try Relief Factor order more because it works for them. Debbie's a true believer. She can finally do the exercises she loves, like planks, push-ups, and her stationary bike, all thanks to Relief Factor. It's been a real game changer for her and for so many other people. You too can benefit. Try it for yourself. Order the 3-week quick start for the discounted price of just $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 833-690-7246 to find out more. That number again, 833-690-7246, or go to relieffactor.com. Feel the difference. I was saying in the last segment that I saw a tweet yesterday from Cenk Uygur, who is the founder of the Young Turks. And basically he goes, I don't understand what's going on in LA. You've got this massive problem of crime and homelessness. The whole city seems completely out of control. Where are the leaders of the city? Why is no one doing anything to fix things? And so I thought about that and I kind of chuckled and I thought to myself, wait a minute. Don't people like you like to live in excrement?
Oh my
In other
goodness.
words, you choose to live in these cities, you vote for Democrats, they have policies that promote this kind of chaos, and then you champion causes like defund the police, let the criminals out, bail reform. And so aren't you getting what you paid for, what you lobbied for, what you fought for? Now, if you have switched, this was my quote tweet. If you want to now take an anti-excrement position, if we can call it that, he might want to consider voting for Republicans, which is kind of your point. If you do just an empirical comparison of Republican and Democratic areas all through the country.
I mean, that's what, you know, every time we go on a trip, we're like, okay, this is too clean. I bet it's run by Republicans.
And sure enough, it is.
Sure enough it is. Oh, this looks filthy. Oh, look at all the homeless people. This is a Democratic area.
And by the way, we're talking about places in the same state. Classic example is Tennessee. You go to Nashville, it's all run down. You've got people pushing up against you, insulting you, challenging you to a fight. And so in Nashville, then you move down to Chattanooga, as we did. We went from Nashville to Chattanooga, and we just noticed a complete difference. There's a big overpass and a bridge, and we were like, where are the people sleeping under the bridge? Oh, wait, there aren't any.
There aren't any. Oh, yeah. And it's really clean, you know. So.
Now, interestingly, let's pivot here to Pennsylvania, because NBC is reporting that the Republicans in Pennsylvania, the Republican legislature, and by the way, this Republican legislature in Pennsylvania is mostly a dud. And by that I mean, these are people who could have done a lot to fix election integrity. They never did
refused.
It, in part because a lot of them have an issue with Trump. And so in order to they didn't want to help Trump. They just wanted to help themselves. But now, evidently, crime has gotten to reach such a bad level in Philadelphia. And there's a Soros-funded prosecutor named Krasner. Is it Larry Krasner? Yeah, it's Larry Krasner. He's the Philadelphia district attorney. And so the Republicans have decided it's time to impeach this guy. And so they're beginning impeachment proceedings against him.
Yeah, but I mean, look at this. It's like record-setting homicide rate. I mean, this is incredible. Every major city in America, the homicide rate it's astronomical. And
it also makes you think a little bit about Soros, because what is Soros up to here? Why would somebody want to put, he's a billionaire, so he can put money in these DA races that transforms the whole race. One guy has, $100,000 and the other guy has $1 million.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense to me, because in order for a society to be kind of like, at the behest of the government, it has to have chaos. And in order for it to have chaos, it has to have crime. It has to really have not only crime, but people hating on each other, division. So it has to have all of those elements in order for it to become the Marxist paradise that Soros wants. So why not get these types of
So you're
DAs?
saying that they create the problem and then they bring in a rescue operation.
Do you really think George Soros thinks that these DAs, right, and these prosecutors all over the country are not going to allow for more crime to happen? Do you really think? And you really think that's his goal?
No, in fact, I think soft on crime
right?
is he chooses them on that basis.
Exactly.
That they will let the criminals go.
Yeah.
They will actually begin to victimize the victims of crime. And what I think has been particularly tragic, we saw some testimony to this effect when we were dealing with Chesa Boudin in San Francisco. Families that had been victimized by crime would go to him and beg him to pay attention to their case. And in a sense, he would give them the cold shoulder, like, you're wasting my time. I'm just not interested in what you have to say. I'm interested in protecting the criminals from people like you. So this is the inverted, upside down, right is wrong and wrong becomes right. John Milton, Satan, evil be thou my good. This is what Soros is all about. Basically a very diabolical figure.
Yeah.
And again, Republicans don't target this guy. They don't go after him. They just let him be as if, that's just Soros. He doesn't look at the way in which Republican donors are targeted by the left.
Yeah, no, that should be number one investigation on this man when we become a majority.
Wouldn't it be great to see this guy in handcuffs?
Oh my goodness. He has wreaked, but I've told you before, he's wreaked havoc not only in America, but in South America, in Spain,
Eastern Europe,
Asia. This guy
is a worldwide menace.
He is. He's a menace, and he needs to go.
We are in book 18 of the Odyssey. And Odysseus, dressed as a beggar, is in the palace and being taunted by the suitors and also by the slave girls, disloyal slave girls who are sleeping with the suitors. So they're in league with the suitors. One of them is a woman named Melantho, who is apparently very close to Penelope. Penelope raised her, but she is now taken up with one of the suitors, a guy named Eurymachus. And she is a nasty person and insults Odysseus and taunts him as a beggar. So here you see the situation where even though Melantho is a slave, she sees herself, well, I'm a slave, but I'm a slave in a great household. This beggar has an even lower social status than me because he has to beg for food and I get my food in the palace. So she feels it's okay to degrade him and insult him, of course, having no idea that she's actually insulting her lawful king. Homer then describes a rather odd episode in which another beggar shows up at the palace. And as I mentioned a day ago, I think yesterday, it's not uncommon for people to stop by the palace and ask for favors, ask for alms. So here comes this other beggar, and interestingly, he gets into a fight with Odysseus. It may be that the other beggar sees Odysseus and thinks, well, you know, there's only going to be one beggar who's going to get some benefits here, so I need to sort of get rid of this other guy, my rival, if you will. And so this guy essentially picks a fight with Odysseus, and of course the suitors are delighted. In fact, one of them, Antinous, goes, "My friends, we have never had so fine a show brought to this house before. The gods be thanked. These two are getting ready for a brawl. Quick, let's goad them on." In other words, let's encourage them to fight. This is kind of like, you see the juvenile behavior here. This is the kind of thing that would happen in a playground. Two guys start getting into a fight and everybody else gets excited. Why? Because for them it's entertainment. So sure enough, the suitors all gather around and they goad this other guy on. And a fight erupts between Odysseus and the other beggar. Now, Odysseus is not interested in this. He doesn't want to do it, but of course he doesn't really have a choice. And so he is forced to, you may say, subdue the other beggar, kind of bring him down, and then essentially leave him alone. And Odysseus then makes a really interesting statement as he kind of dusts himself off. He addresses the suitors. And he gives, well, I suppose if you were reciting the Odyssey, this would be a little speech. But I just want to recite a line or two of it because this is Odysseus in a relatively self-conscious mode. Odysseus says, he's talking to the suitors, and he essentially says, "Hey, suitors, you're enjoying this spectacle. You've been goading us on, but take note of what I say." This is Odysseus. "Of all the creatures that live and breathe and creep on earth, we humans are the weakest." Interesting statement about human nature. We are the weakest. But weakest how? Weakest in physical strength? Weakest in what way? He goes on, "When the gods bestow on us good fortune and our legs are spry and limber, we think that nothing can ever go wrong." So here's Odysseus. Let's remember, Odysseus is in his 40s. Most of these suitors are much younger. They are the sons of men who went off to war with Odysseus. So Odysseus is saying to them, when you're young, you think you can do anything. You can think that you're physically invincible, and you also think that you have more license to act any way you want. And he goes on to say, "But when the gods bring misery and pain, we have to bear our suffering with calm. I once had what most people count as wealth, great riches. I committed many crimes of violence, abuses of power. No one should turn away from what is right." Very interesting. This is Odysseus basically saying, first of all, he's slightly revealing himself. He goes, "I once had great riches and power." Why? He's the king of Ithaca. But of course he doesn't say that. He implies like he is a great man who has been brought low to this condition of being a beggar. And then he goes on to say, again, revealing a little more about himself, "I committed many crimes of violence, abuses of power." This is Odysseus really thinking about both his role in the Trojan War and also, I think, a lot of the sacrilege abuses that were committed by the Greeks. It's not mentioned that Odysseus himself did anything, but he was certainly among others who did. Rapes, sacrileges, murders, that occurred after the war that went above and beyond the normal rules of combat. Odysseus is aware of all of this, and he's taking some responsibility of all of that here. And the no one should turn away from what is right. It's almost like Odysseus is talking a little bit to himself, because I think he knows that this is going to fall on deaf ears as far as the suitors are concerned. And sure enough, it does. A guy named Amphinomus, one of the suitors, is so angered by what Odysseus says that he takes a cup and he flings it at Odysseus, and it misses. But he's like, take that, you're Odysseus. This is what you deserve for this so-called speech you're giving us here. Throws the cup at him. And so you see the suitors here in their abusive, customary behavior. And all of this is setting up for Odysseus's revenge, which is really what comes next.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.